We teach people to live by a guiding question. We say it's just simple to ask, what does love require of me in this situation?
What scares you the most in life, man? I bet it's failure. Hey, thanks for joining us. This is part of our Men Mentoring Men series. This is video number 2 if you're moving along sequentially. And what we want to talk about to men today is what scares you the most. And I am willing to bet 100% it's failure. In fact, I don't know a guy that if we really track down what scares him, what bothers him, it is failure. In fact, most of us are afraid of failing in our marriage. Most of us are afraid of failing our kids. Most of us are afraid of failing our jobs. We're afraid of failing financially. In fact, we have stories. The what we regret stories are all stories of, if you take it back to the core, it's failure. Why? Because we're men who are built to succeed. We accomplish, we conquer, we take over, right? That's the core essence of what it means to be a man. Not the sissified version that some people talk about, but what it means to be a real man. It means that we took it on and we conquered. That's why we climb the mountain. That's why we climb the tree. That's why we go on that hike. That's why we push our bodies to extremes. That's why we take on things that at times we go, it probably should never be taken on, but part of us wants that adventure. Part of us says, but I can defeat it. I can overcome it. And what happens then is if we take that back, we go, the core fear of man then is failure. Here's the challenging piece with that. In life, the question is not if you will fail or if you will have problems. The real question is when you fail, how will you deal with it? And part of that is because the essence of humans, as God had created them perfect, but then we chose sin and abandoned God, part of our essence is imperfection. We are designed perfectly, but sin entered in and the design became flawed. In fact, part of discipleship is returning and moving towards our intended purpose. So let me tell you a story. There was a guy named Peter. Perhaps you've heard about him. Jesus called Peter as a fisherman to come follow him. Maybe you know stories about Peter. Peter's the guy who jumps out of the boat, walks on the water towards Jesus. The only guy to get out of the boat, by the way. I know, you probably heard a story and you heard about Peter sinking, but I'm more impressed that Peter got out of the boat because I would have not done it. I would have been like, look, I know we don't walk on water. Jesus, get in the boat, then we'll talk, right? But Peter has such faith that he jumps out of the boat and walks on the water. Peter's the guy that when Jesus says, who do you all say I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of God. But Peter is like the leader of the disciples, goes on and becomes the leader. But before he becomes the leader who follows Jesus so intently and intimately that he's willing to die upside down on a cross for his faith in Jesus, he has a moment of incredible failure. Jesus says to Peter on the night that he's serving the Passover meal and says, this is my blood poured out for you, my body broken for you. He says to Peter, you're going to deny me. In fact, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no way, I will die with you. And yet they come and they take Jesus away and they have Jesus locked up and he's on trial. And a little girl, a servant girl comes and says, aren't you one of his followers? And he said, oh, no. And another man comes up and says, weren't you with Jesus? And he says, no. Another man says, you sound like you're, no. I don't know the man, Peter says. The guy who was willing to die for him. Now imagine the pain and anguish that Peter feels. Right? Jesus dies on the cross. And can you hear Jesus or Peter kind of run through his head? I promised I would die with him and for him. What a great failure. And I mean great not in like good, but great as in, wow, that's huge, right? In fact, I bet you kind of feel that way about most of your failures. Maybe you have one where you've denied Jesus too. Maybe there's been an addiction you've been trying to overcome and you just keep fighting it, but you're stumbling through it. And you keep falling back. Maybe you've had a marriage that no matter how hard you worked, you just couldn't save. And you live with that regret and hurt and that failure. Maybe you've got a job that you've just lost and you feel like I'm worthless because I failed at my job. And how am I going to provide for my family? Maybe you tried a certain level of education, just couldn't hack it. And you tell yourself, yeah, it wasn't for everybody, but deep inside you're going, am I a failure? Do I have value? Peter asks the similar questions. What's interesting is that we see specifically in Mark 16, after Jesus has come back, he appears to the ladies and he says to the ladies, go tell the disciples that I've come back. But if you read Mark 16, verse 7 really closely, you see Jesus insert something really interesting. Now, this is really interesting because Peter, we believe, dictated the Gospel of Mark to Mark. And so Peter's kind of the author, and Mark's kind of the one subscribing it. And we got the author Mark because he was the one that wrote it. But we believe, because of all kinds of things within the Gospel of Peter, within the Gospel of Mark, that Peter probably dictated it, that it's a story coming from Peter's mouth. And what you see Jesus say to the ladies in Mark 16:7, he says, go tell the disciples and Peter. You see, Jesus knew how bad Peter felt. And he wanted to emphasize, Peter, I know you failed, but I'm reinstating you. We go to the Gospel of John and we can see the reinstatement of Peter, where Jesus says to him, you will lead my church. Man, here's why this is the second message. Following Jesus can be hard. And depending on your background, you may have learned that it was all about the rules. You may have come to the place where you're like, God's standards are so big, I can't do it. And you're going to quickly want to give up. First of all, it's about the relationship, not the rules. The rules will come in naturally. Or maybe you feel like you're such a failure that why would God even care? The reason the second lesson that we have and what it means to be a godly man is about failure is because I'd like to invite you to fail forward. John Maxwell writes in his book, Failing Forward. Failing forward is the ability to get back up after you've been knocked down, kicked down, and learn from your mistakes and move forward in a better direction. Here's what I would say to you, man. We all fear failure. What it means to be a godly man is to no longer embrace the fear of failure, but to say, I'm going to be able to conquer in spite of failure. And the reason we do that is because the weight of the world isn't really on your shoulders. The weight of the world is on Jesus' shoulders. And he invited you to what? Recognize your need for him and follow him. And so if you believe in Jesus, it doesn't relieve you of any responsibilities, but it does mean that someone paid the price for your sins, which are the greatest failure, and invites you to do what? Not be perfect, not obey a bunch of rules, but to follow him. And when we follow Jesus, we learn to fail forward and learn from our mistakes, to get back up and be godly men. So my challenge to you is to ask the question, what are some of your greatest regrets? What are some of your biggest fears have to do with failure? And are you brave enough to follow Jesus and fail?